Hello there and welcome to The Ring, our brand new talk show here on Euronews. Each week, two elected members of the European Parliament will go face to face on some of the pressing issues that they're debating inside the European hemicycle in Brussels and Strasbourg. And the tone for this show, The Ring, has been set by the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
Europe is in a fight for a continent that is whole and at peace, a fight for our values and our democracies.
But what kind of fight and what kind of values, what kind of future do we want here? That is exactly what we will explore on this brand new show, The Ring. And the topic, of course, for this very first edition is EU enlargement.
Europe was built on a promise that unity can transform a history of conflict into a future of peace. Now the drums of war sound again. Countries from Ukraine to Montenegro and Northern Macedonia are reaching for that promise, not just for prosperity, but also for security. Supporters argue enlargement of the Union will amplify Europe's global voice, reinforce its defenses, and uphold its values. Critics warn it could stretch institutions and deepen old divides. So the real question is, will Europe rise to the challenge and open its doors, or close them at a defining moment in its history?
And we're thrilled to be joined by two members of the European Parliament, David McAllister and Mark Botenga. Let's get to know them more in this clip.
David McAllister, veteran member of the European Parliament, Chair of Foreign Affairs, Vice President of the centre-right EPP Group, a leading voice in European and transatlantic affairs. And when enlargement talks with Albania and North Macedonia were delayed, he didn't hold back. The EU failed to show leadership, courage, and strategic vision, he said. Mark Botenga, Belgian MEP. A fierce defender of workers' rights and public services, he's one of the European Parliament's strongest critics of austerity and corporate power. He voted against the EU's economic aid package for the Western Balkans, warning it comes loaded with neoliberal conditions that, in his words, would deepen the crisis instead of solving it.
We have, of course, a lot to discuss, so let's kick off with yourself, David McAllister. Croatia was the last country to join back in 2013. Who will be the next to join and by when?
Well, there are 10 candidate countries, and I'm very sure one of the 10 will be. In the moment, Montenegro is the front runner, then comes Albania. But apart from these 10, there are also some developments in the High North. There are new debates in Iceland, in Norway, and even in Greenland, who perhaps might also want to join the European Union.
Indeed, as we're hearing, EU enlargement, the momentum is indeed there. Is it for you? Are you in favour of EU enlargement, Mark Botenga?
Well, I'm not against or in favour of EU enlargement. I think we need to see why we do it and what we want to obtain, what's going to be the consequences. Because there have been consequences for working class people of previous enlargements, and we've seen that today as well. You know, there have been protests of farmers against liberalization of trade, for example, with Ukraine. There have been victims. We've seen social dumping practices that have made people very skeptical of these enlargements. So what I would say is we need to get our house in order socially before we risk having the same effects again.
Can we afford EU enlargement?
The history of the European integration has always been the history of enlargement. We started with 6, we became 9, 12, 15, 25, 27, even 28 members. There are 48, 49 countries in Europe, and 10 out of these want to become members of the European Union, and we should support these countries in their aspirations. But of course, in the end, all the necessary criteria need to be met, politically, financially, economically, that's clear. But I am happy to see that further countries want to join our family of nations because they share our values and they believe that they are stronger and better off together with us.
And we saw the so-called report cards or progress reports coming out today from the European Commission this week in Brussels. What are your views on them?
Well, obviously we've received these hundreds of pages just recently, so we're not going to pretend, any one of us, I think, to have read or studied them in depth. However, one thing I looked at, and which I'm disappointed by, I mean, is that, of course, we know this is no longer just a merit-based process. I mean, there's a geopolitical dimension to it now. No one's going to deny that. But what I have seen is that over the last years, I've seen a lot of protests from trade unions, International Trade Union Confederation, European Trade Union Confederation, saying there's a clear backsliding on working class democracy in Ukraine. There have been new laws. There's been even the Secretary General of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine that's been put under house arrest, right? And the Commission doesn't seem to take that seriously. And I think, you know, you already have a martial law and you're attacking civil society in this way. That needs to be on the agenda. And what I'm seeing is that we're abandoning basically the criteria just because of geopolitics.
Is that a point that you could address, David McAllister? Many feel that the EU is not working for them, those that are in the club already.
There are 10 candidate countries in the moment, but the big difference between Ukraine and the other 9 is Ukraine is going through a fully fledged war, a Russian war of aggression. And of course, you need to always consider under which enormous pressure and challenges Ukraine lies. Yes, Ukraine is still far away from meeting all the necessary EU criteria. Ukraine is on the way, it's a marathon. And of course, also the Commission has been very outspoken in also criticizing what is not going well in Ukraine. But my impression is that the Ukraine government usually responds in a positive way to the criticism coming from the Commission and the European Parliament. That's why we need to also work on social standards and workers' rights in Ukraine, just like in any other candidate country. But please, we need to bear in mind this country is under attack by a vicious regime in the Russian Federation.
If you are under attack, is your priority to crack down on trade unionists? Is your priority then to say we need to liberalize the energy sector, the banking sector? No, I mean, your priority should be to bring back peace, to get back your sovereignty and so on. So this argument of, you know, war in order to justify social repression, I think is just out of scope.
Well, Mark, I'm very sorry, I didn't say that. I said that, of course, Ukraine has to also meet all the necessary criteria. And there are a lot of things where Ukraine still has to do a lot of homework. But in general, we need to just consider under which enormous challenge they are fighting a war against Russia on the one hand, and on the other hand, preparing to join the European Union. That is very impressive and that deserves respect. But once again, I am not arguing, I'm not defending this. In the end, they will have to meet all the criteria, including the social criteria you have mentioned.
So we agree being disappointed by the Commission.
What about internal reforms, David McAllister? What kind of internal reforms does the EU need to do? Its own homework, perhaps?
Well, the one thing is that further countries will at one day probably join our European Union. It depends, of course, when. On the other hand, we need to prepare in the meantime. We are operating with a set of rules and institutions which stem from a time where we are 9, 12, 15 members. We have to reform. We have to get ready for enlargement ourselves. That means we need to strengthen the European Parliament. We have to, in the Council, introduce further qualified majority voting. Unanimity is something which comes from the time where we were 6 or 9 or 12 member states. It doesn't work with 27. It will not work with 28, 29 or 30. And also we need to discuss, can this system continue that every single member state has an own commissioner? Already the commission in the moment is rather large.
I'm sure that's something you'd agree with too, Mark Botenga.
Well, the Commission is rather large, this is one thing, but what I would be saying is if we want, first of all, to avoid a social, massive negative social impact on our societies, there's a number of rules, European rules, that we need to revise in a very ambitious way. And I'm thinking about subcontracting. I'm thinking about posted workers. I'm thinking about pluriactivity. And I'm thinking about letterbox companies. Because if we do not tackle this socially, we're going to have a massive backlash. And we've seen these protests. We've seen protests of farmers in Poland and Italy. We've seen protests of truckers from Poland and the Slovak Republic.
Well, what about the backlash from countries in the Western Balkans who've been waiting for so long to enter the
Absolutely.
Union?
And I really understand the frustration of the Western Balkans and of these countries. Because indeed, they've been waiting for a long time. Other countries perhaps even longer. And they feel disrespected. They feel disrespected when they see, that certain other countries get a pass.
And now they're hearing about this potential probation period. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, until now, we have argued you are either in or out. You're a fully fledged member of the European Union or not. I think that we have to get away from this black and white debate, and that means that the solution is the gradual integration of candidate countries into the European Union. So we begin with the gradual integration in the single market and in other important policy fields, and then the next step is the EU membership, and after EU membership, the next step is then to join the core zone of the European Union. That means the Euro and the Schengen cooperation area. I think that is the way, and also we need to perhaps think out of the box, how can we address the concerns of some of our member states that additional members might at the beginning be hampering the further integration process. But I mean, we've managed that until now, and I'm very sure with candidate countries 28, 29 and 30 joining, we will be able to do so.
You agree with that, or do you think it could be completely dysfunctional?
Well, it could obviously be completely dysfunctional. That's why I'm saying, we need the social guarantees, very clearly. We need upwards convergence, not a downward spiral of dumping on the one hand. And secondly, if we do not involve the people, if we think this is all going to be decided in Brussels, in Strasbourg, there will be a backlash democratically as well, because people will not take it. People will be like, hey, my working life, my salary is being affected. And so that is something we need to deal with.
I don't always necessarily agree with Mark, but on this point, he's right. Yes, indeed, we have to convince our citizens, we have to convince the people, but the social standards which are so important to you, and they're just as important to me, I think one way to guarantee these social standards in the candidate countries is that we go through a thorough enlargement process, because in the end, all the criteria need to be met, and that's why enlargement is a huge opportunity, not only for the people, but also for the businesses and the employers and the employees in these countries.
Interesting, on this very first edition of The Ring, you're starting to agree with each other, because politicians, it's all about building compromises, of course.
A German Christian Democrat and a Belgian socialist, I mean, we're wide apart usually.
And now it is time, in fact, to show our viewers a little taste of what it's like inside the hemicycle. As some of you may have seen, MEPs get the chance to pose questions to each other, sometimes very provocative. David McAllister, please start with your question for Mark Botenga.
Mark, if I understood you correctly, you're rather enlargement skeptical and you want to not accelerate the process. You believe that we need to take our time. On the other hand, grey zones will exist. Grey zones will be created, and China and the Russian federations are just there to fill these grey zones. Why do you do that?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I would send you back the question. Russia and European Parliament, we've criticized that very long, that Russia thinks in terms of spheres of influence. And they try to influence other countries to do what they want, to copy their model or impose their model. The way I hear you speak sometimes about enlargement is very similar. Where I'm saying, should the European Union then enter in this logic of spheres of influence? I don't think we should. And I don't think we should be interfering in other countries. They have their democratic processes, their local evolutions, and we should respect this. And this might indeed end up in enlargement. I'm not principally against. But what we should not be doing is copying a model of countries that we criticize.
Mark Botenga, you now have the opportunity to pose a question to David McAllister.
Well, let me come back to what we were discussing before. I mean, you said that indeed social convergence upward is important. Then I'm going to ask you, why is EPP systematically opposing, ambitious social proposals that could basically end or limit social dumping? I'm thinking, for example, of banning subcontracting below 1 or 2 levels. I'm thinking of, for example, forcing letterbox companies to have real activity in the country they're officially based. Think of Slovenia, think of a number of other countries. Why doesn't EPP take that social agenda seriously, aside when we're discussing very abstractly about enlargement?
Okay, thank you for your question. Not directly related to the enlargement countries, I understand.
But it's very close to your heart, of course.
Well, look, first of all, the EPP has always been the leading party when it comes to further developing the social market economy. We are not supporters of free capitalism. We support the social market economy, which Ludwig Erhard, for instance, in Germany, created, and this is our model for Europe. And this includes, of course, social standards, workers' rights, labor rights. We have always been at the forefront of this, and I strongly believe, by the way, we also need a strong social pillar within the European Union, because we need the citizens on board, and the European integration project should not be an elitist project of the well-off, but of all, and this, of course, includes the hard-working people we have in Europe. That's why we can have a a more detailed discussion on these matters. But I have to add one point. Mark, I do not agree what you said, that EU enlargement is interfering in third countries. These countries have voluntarily taken the decision to join our family because they believe in democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. And I will always support countries and governments and parliaments who want to go exactly this way.
I will
answer that one.
Let me just reply to that. That is a very naive vision, and you know you don't share that, of how these processes go. You know the European Union has been very active in sponsoring NGOs and media to influence public debate, you know, in these countries. We've done this in Ukraine, we've done it in Georgia, we've done it in many countries. And you can say this is legitimate, and we could argue about this, saying it is legitimate, it's not legitimate. But the other side, you know, the Russians that want their sphere of influence are doing very similar things. What I'm saying is that we need to listen to social movements over there and not prioritize our own corporate interests. Because what we're seeing today, honestly, if you see the Finnish minister going to Georgia to protest with the protesters, you can say, you know, if a Russian would do that, we would consider it unacceptable interference, and rightly so. If we're doing it, we're saying, well, you know, it's a support for democracy. So this thin line, and there we need to be very clear that there might be double standards in the way we look at things.
Well, Mark, I think here we have some clear differences between the two of us. When it comes to interfering in candidate countries, I wouldn't at first think of EU member states. These countries are being flooded by malign Russian influence.
Absolutely.
Fake news, propaganda. They are trying to destabilize democracy. Mark, I think the socialists, your party, you should deal more with this horrific Russian foreign malign influence we have in Europe.
Just to make clear, because otherwise we're going to get some problems with colleagues, I'm not from the socialist group. Huh?
Well, how do I call you then?
Yes, indeed. You said the way the left group, but okay, I mean, just to, in order for our socialist colleagues not to get a heart attack.
Okay, well, what are you then?
We're the left group.
You're just a lefty. Okay, well, when
it's like
Mark the leftist. Okay.
I'm glad you're getting to know each other here on the ring. Let's perhaps bring in another voice on this very important discussion of EU enlargement that has made a political comeback. That is the voice of the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, who spoke at the Euronews Enlargement Summit here in Brussels. And he said that Donald Trump is supporting Ukraine in becoming a member of the European Union, that Trump understands that this is the will of the Ukrainian people. But my question is, what do you think of this statement? And do we really need the approval of the White House for this kind of thing?
The brave women and men in Ukraine are not only defending their territorial sovereignty and integrity every day, they are also defending our European values. They are defending the European peace and security architecture. And if there's one people in Europe who has shown how committed they are to the European integration progress, then it's the brave women and men from Ukraine. They deserve all our support.
Mark Botenga.
Well, I think Donald Trump has launched one of the most aggressive attacks on Ukraine's sovereignty we have seen over the last years. I mean, you've seen, obviously, the horrible war of Russia, you know, occupying, one-fifth of the country. But what has Donald Trump done? He's come saying, you know, you want peace, I can guarantee that, but in exchange, I want your natural resources. Now, that is a direct attack on the economic sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. So I don't think he should be giving lessons on what sovereignty means.
And what about Moldova? We also heard from Maia Sandu, the president of Moldova, saying that she also one day wants to be a member of the European Union. Can the EU afford a poor country like Moldova? David McAllister.
Moldova, who's ever been there, knows great people, great country, and they are on their way. I urge the Council to open the accession negotiations with Moldova now in autumn. They are waiting for this desperately, and the Moldovans have shown their European commitment despite all the aggressive, malign Russian influence. The people in Moldova stood strong and voted 3 times in favor of a pro-European orientation at the referendum, at the presidential elections, and just most recently at the parliamentary elections.
Mark Botenga.
Why not? Let's talk. I mean, I'm in favor of talks. Moldova, as you know, is not an easy situation with the Transnistrian situation, so that will need to be solved. Let's not pretend that doesn't exist. But we always need to keep talking. What I'm saying is let's keep talking with the respect of local democracy. You know, let's keep talking and let's not accelerate things beyond that in the hope to, you know, eat them up quicker than the others, because that's not what Europe should be.
Well, now we've heard the view of the MEPs. I'm curious also to get the view of the European public, to hear how they feel about EU enlargement. We've been digging into the latest Eurobarometer, and according to the latest data, 56% of Europeans are in favour of EU enlargement, 39% show mistrust. The pros of those polled were that the EU could benefit from larger markets, there'd be more work and more skilled labour, and the cons, many said, the cost for the taxpayers, the risk of corruption, organised crime and terrorism, and also uncontrolled migration.
One of the very interesting points is as well that most people don't believe they will benefit themselves from enlargement. Now, the idea is nice, and the idea, this is also why in the EU bubble it's so, you speak about enlargement because it's nice, like Europe expanding. But many people are afraid and know they will not benefit if we do not have the strong internal social measures, and apparently EPP would be open to that, so that's the news of the day, then we cannot do this enlargement.
I take very seriously that 39% are against. And we have to work on this. We have to improve our communication. We have to explain to our citizens that further enlargement, if we do it properly, I am not advocating enlargement for enlargement. I am advocating an enlargement process which is merit-based, where each country is individually judged, and that in the end all the necessary criteria are met. And by the way, enlargement is a regatta, not a convoy. But in the end, if these countries, with their economies, join, it is beneficial for both sides because it means new markets, new business opportunities, and the enlargement until now has shown, especially the big enlargement in 2004, that it was beneficial for everyone in Europe.
Was the Big Bang enlargement successful in your view, Mark Botenga?
Many people in, older member states, France, Germany as well, Belgium, saw this as an opening for social dumping, which was reality for many people. And many people in the more eastern, the more newer member states left their countries. But it did create structural, or aggravate perhaps structural problems within the European, let's say, the subcontinent of Europe. And if we're going to do that again with now one, at least very big member states, demographically, economically, as Ukraine, we might have that in a much, much stronger version.
I think the solution to the problem of social dumping is what we have seen in other cases, transitional periods. But we don't go from one extreme immediately to the other, but we have these transitional agreements, these transitional periods is for the free movement of labour, as we had with some Eastern European countries after 2004.
What about some of the cons there that we listed?
We need to better communicate. It is our duty, not only in the candidate countries, but also in the 27 member states, to convince our citizens that this is beneficial. And I would see there are 48, 49 countries in Europe. 27 are in the European Union. But the European project has always been open to all countries who lie geographically in Europe, who share our values, and are ready to go for a very challenging negotiation process. That's where we are.
And the EU does need a success story.
Okay, but I'm not particularly concerned with the PR needs of the European Union. That is a different thing. What I do
but otherwise
think
it could break up.
Yeah, but we need to watch out with the communication aspect of it. Because I've heard this on many things. Also development cooperation, because it always has the same undertone of like, we're doing great things. We're just not explaining them well enough to the people. I think people have real concerns, and we need to take that seriously and adapt policies, not just adapt, PR strategies. So I think this is really important. And secondly, let's on the other hand not stigmatize potential member states.
Mark, if we had applied your attitude, the enlargement in 2004 wouldn't have been possible. And I'm happy to live in a Europe. I would have been happy. I'm happy to live in a European Union where Poland, the Baltic countries, the Czech Republic, and others are also fully fledged members. The Europe is more than old Western Europe. Europe is Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. And I think that if these countries, these candidate countries, are on their way to fulfill all the necessary criteria, and I have been the rapporteur for one of the candidate countries for 5 years. I know what hard work it is. We should give them all the support, and you are playing with fears, because all these arguments you have mentioned today, I remember were exactly the same ones I heard before 2004 when the 10 Eastern and Southern European countries joined, and also when Romania and Bulgaria joined in 2007 and Croatia in 2013.
And we didn't deal with them.
Pardon?
Sorry, that's the point. We didn't deal with them. And this created fears. This created also a backlash in certain of these countries because we didn't take them seriously. And that is the point.
I will give you a good example. Croatia joined in 2013, and 12 years later, Croatia is not only a fully fledged member of the European Union, but also a fully fledged member of the Schengen area and introduced the Euro.
How many Croatians are forced to leave their country to get a decent work in Germany? Croatians now feel forced. You know that German courses are big business in Croatia because there's not enough investment in the Croatian productive economy. And so this is something that the Croatians struggle with. And I want to listen to the Bulgarian trade unions, to the Romanian trade unions, to the Polish trade unions that are saying we are not getting out of this what we as workers deserve.
And here we're getting a real glimpse of what the debates inside the European hemicycle are like. That was the view of Mark Botenga, the view of David McAllister. I'd like to hear your view. Please reach out to us here, thering@euronews.com. Before we come to a close, we have a bit of a rapid buzzer round for our two contenders. I will pose a very short question and I require a very short answer. Just yes or no. Mark Botenga, is the future of the European Union bright? Yes or no?
If we fundamentally change policies, yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Are opt-outs a good idea for joining member states?
Yes.
We've already seen this. Can be an option.
Should Turkey join the EU one day, Mark Botenga?
I think for the moment, neither the EU nor Turkey is asking that.
Yes or no?
Under the given circumstances, no.
Should countries with anti-LGBTQI+ laws be blocked from joining the EU, Mark Botenga?
I think that's one of the fundamental rights that should be a condition indeed.
Mark Botenga really struggling there with the yes or no answers.
No, sorry, yes.
Dave McAllister,
yes.
In your view, and should geopolitical considerations like countering Russian or Chinese influence justify faster EU enlargement?
Yes.
Very dangerous, and I'm going to continue struggling with yes or no.
Has the EU...
What, Russian and Chinese influence, you're struggling?
No, I'm not struggling with Russia or Chinese influence. What I'm saying is, should we... That's always a disadvantage speaking to a Euro bubble audience, of course. But what I'm saying is that the best way to deal with that is not necessarily by an unfair enlargement process.
Final question. Have you agreed with anything you've heard from your opponent today?
Look, I know Mark Botenga. He's a member of our committee. And I would say he's a staunch fighter for social rights. And that's where I would give him credit.
And what about you, Mark Botenga?
No, absolutely. I think we share certain ideas of that Europe should become more democratic and clearly also more social. So I'm going to take the EPP up on this. I mean, this is going to be a starting point for a new cooperation.
And that point brings this very special first edition of The Ring to an end. A round of applause.